Now let's talk a little bit about die cutting. There are also a gazillion fun things you can do with die cutting. And I want to just demonstrate a couple things. First of all, I wanted to show you today. So the ones I'm going to be primarily demonstrating is this version, Bigz, B-I-G-Z, and this is by Sizzix, and they still sell them, the bigger dies. And basically they look like this. They do take up a lot more space, and they're basically, this is just like a foam. And then the blade is submerged beneath the surface of this foam. And the reason that this one is really cool is that this can cut thicker material. I mean, I think even leather. Like, so this can cut a lot more than what the thinner ones can. These are the thin ones. You can see they take up a lot less space. So they're very, easy to store, easy to manage compared to this. I mean, this is basically a dragonfly and that's a butterfly. So you can see the difference that's going to take in your space. But if I wanted to do 10 dragonflies at one time, I'm not sure if I can handle that much, but, or if I wanted to do a thicker chipboard, for example, I would need to use something like this if I was using thicker material, because as you can see by looking at this isn't thick enough compared to the material to be able to cut that, because the material is thicker than the actual die. So this can really only handle up to general cardstock as far as thickness goes. Now you can do different materials with it, and I'll be talking about some of those, but you just can't do things that are very thick. Whereas this is going to allow you to more flexibility to work with thicker material. That's the biggest difference between those two is that. Now these of course are more cost effective. You see I'm handling it. This is not a sharp blade. This is a quote unquote blade. It does have blades in there, but they're not sharp to the touch. They're not going to cut your fingers or anything like that. However, the pressure of this machine pushing through there does push down hard enough to basically break the paper and those points. So this is an example of the thin die, and then this is an example of the cut image. And I'm gonna demonstrate this one because it's pretty intricate and those can be a little bit tricky. So I wanted to show you how to do that and how to deal with some of the trickiness of it. One little tip I wanted to share is, in order to have it release easier, you can add a layer of wax paper, and that'll not only probably put a layer of the wax maybe in the blade, but it'll also help release the image, as long as it's not too thick to where it takes up too much of the space. So I can try a little bit of that to make it release a little better. And another thing you can do if it starts to not cut real well is you can use tin foil and cut the tin foil, and that'll help sharpen the quote unquote blades a little bit. So if it starts to get a little dull, you can try that. Now in this case, I don't have the right base set up because I have it set up for the embossing folder. So I'm going to switch over to my magnetic because this is so much easier. And I'm going to put my bottom bread down. I'm going to put my paper, and then I'm going to put my die how I want it. And I'm lining it up. One of the challenges with the magnetic is sometimes the magnet pulls it a little bit, shifts it over, because that's how magnets work. They like a certain position. And so sometimes if it doesn't work, you can switch to the other plate. Like if you're really trying to line it in a specific spot, or else you can move onto a different area on the plate to get the right lineup. But if it doesn't work, you can always switch to the one that's not and then just tape it down to make sure that it stays put. It's just that they shift very easily. So I'm trying to line it up pretty evenly on both sides because I can also use the background. Oh, I forgot to put my wax paper. So I'm going to put my paper down first, then I'm going to put my wax paper, then I'm going to put the butterfly. But I can use the background as well as the image itself. I want to make sure everything is going to fit within the machine. So you got to make sure everything is cut down, all the paper and everything. I should have had that smaller. All right, so I'm going to feed that in. And you want it to be somewhat challenging. You'll hear snap, crackle, pop sometimes. That's a good sign. If you're not feeling a lot of pressure as you try to put in there, it might mean that you need to add a shim because you don't have enough pressure on your die. This didn't feel like a ton of pressure. But I'm going to check it out and see how it looks. I did try to go through two things, right? The wax, and look at how easy that's popping off. If I do it without the wax, I should have probably showed that to you first. I would be kind of wrestling to get the butterfly out. You'll notice these little open spots. Those are so you can push the design and pop those little tidbits out. So there's a lot of those openings to allow that. And the wax paper is what helps to get all that out because those can all get stuck in there and then you're spending, a lot of time just trying to release everything. So let me just show you. I just used the wax paper, so it might have already just added lubrication to the blades, but I want you to see the difference because that came out so much quicker. Not sure if it, like I said, I just put basically some wax on it, so it might actually keep a little bit of wax on it and might help it release this one too. But yeah, it's popping up. It's not quite as easy to pop out, but it's still lifting pretty well. I think some of that wax is still there, but now I still have to get all of those parts out of in between the butterfly and the parts out of this. And you can see there's a lot more of those pieces in there. One way to quickly get those pieces out is to use like a stiff bristled brush. You can use like a scrubber brush, or this is a nail brush, and you just push down into those openings. So that's a little tip. If something's sticking and that doesn't work, you can always use the craft pick. So I'm going to probably need to use that to pop some of these pieces out of this because I don't want to use that brush on this. That'll be a little bit too rough on the paper, but I can use this little pick to just pop those out, and most of them will come out pretty easily without sticking. If you do get some that just didn't cut all the way through, you can just take an X-Acto knife and just carefully from the back, you can just cut along. You can try to tear it from the back too. If it tears a little bit of the back, the backing of the paper, it's usually not a problem, but you just got to be really careful that you're not making so that the front shows any of the paper tearing. So I wanted to show you that because it can get futzy with the intricate dies, but the outcome is definitely worth the futziness. And even if you were to use a die cutting machine that's electric, that does all the cutting, you'd still have to do this with these intricate dies. So be aware of that. Now, not all of them have a lot of laciness to them, but the more intricate they are, the more work you're gonna have to do. I remember doing for my stepson when he got my ex-stepson when he got married, I made a mistake of designing a card that had a very lacy heart, and I had to cut through 3 layers, and I didn't realize I could only cut through one piece at a time, and then I had to deal with all of these little pieces, and it was a labor of love, let me just say. I had to make like, I don't know, 50 or 100, and it was too much. I should have really thought better of that. Like, I should have really planned that better. All right, this one had the wax paper, and I'm just lifting that right off. And it does almost kind of feel like it may have put a little wax on this too, which is okay if you're not coloring it, but just be aware that that could be a problem. Okay, I'm going to put that off to the side. Wanted you to see that. And now I want to show you some ways that you can play around with this and other dies. So this is a card base, and this is an example of doing just like we did with the embossing. You can do partial die cutting. So this is just where you put the plate only over part of the card. Now I could do a number of things with this, and I'm going to show you some examples. I could fold this back, and then this card would just have that shape. I could basically cut it straight here on this side and this side, and then just have the end of the card be that. Or I could use the background of this die cut. I could put it over that, and then I could have this lifted through it. So that's kind of a cool effect as well. And I could put a sentiment over here. And that's why I like to try to get it even, because I can use this side of it too. You can also use that as a stencil. In fact, I made, using that particular die and some acetate, I actually created a stencil. Another thing you can do is I could just take another white one and put it right over the top of it. And I could either cut half of it so that part of it's there, or I could glue these two together so that they're thicker and then have that raised up. So that's kind of a cool effect. And again, I could, you know, have that on there and then fold the back down. So that's interesting. Or I could take the black one and put it over that and glue it to this side as well. Either offset so you can see the white behind it, or together so that you don't. And again, I could fold that back. So just with this one, you know, just cutting these two colors and this, I have so many variations of what I could do with that. Another thing that I've done with that particular one is the whole thing doesn't have to be on there. So this one, I didn't have enough space for the whole wing, so I just trimmed them off, and I made it like it was an embossing to this embossed pattern. Here, let me bring this down so I can get so this was an embossed pattern, and then I just glued on this layer and just added to make it look like a 3-dimensional embossed pattern. So like this stands out more than these, but it all looks embossed. I like some of those more simple cards. Another example of what I did with the background of that is I took the background, and this was just a spider web doily that I already had in. It was purchased like that. I didn't make it, although I think they do sell, you know, spider web or doily die cuts out there, or you can create them with the electric die machines. But anyway, I just put that underneath so that it showed through, and so it created some interesting elements. And then I did heat emboss along the edge of the white paper, and then also the red background matting. So that's kind of fun. And this is more of that webbing. and I just used a punch. This wasn't a die, but this was just one of those punches like I showed last week. And I actually punched out an image in a calendar of, this is an eyeball of a crocodile. So this is the coloring of the crocodile. And I thought that looked like spider coloring. So, so I mean, if I had a die, I could do it a die, or I could do the punch or whatever. But so you can have fun with finding things in magazines. And I glued it onto a couple more layers of cardstock to make it thick. And so it pops up from the card. So it's 3-dimensional. So, and I curved the legs down so it looks like it's crawling. All right. And then with another different butterfly, let's talk about this one. I did a bunch of things with this. So this is another one of those alcohol pages. And I showed this last week during the watercolor, but some of you didn't see. So this is the ink that I did on the alcohol inks, and I just used that as a background. And then this butterfly is actually made out of a styrofoam cup. So this is a great way to upcycle some of your things by creating some dies. So let me show you a few different things that I've upcycled. I was able to make 4 butterflies with 1 styrofoam cup. And here's what it looks like before I did any alcohol inks. But because it's a non-porous surface and alcohol inks work on that, I was able to color this with the alcohol inks. You could, use Sharpies, which are alcohol-based inks as well. You can use Copics if you have them, or it's even really cool looking, just plain white. Doesn't really need anything. So it's kind of a fun material. The other thing that I did is I glued 2 of them, and I'm going to demonstrate this because I haven't tried this one yet, but I glued 2 layers of the styrofoam together, and then I glued them onto a little piece of chipboard that I attempted to cut with. It's not really chipboard, it's really thin chipboard, so it's a little too thick for the die. So it cut the edge, but it really didn't cut out the details of the butterfly because it's just too thick of material, but it was perfect for the outline for this. And this is a stamp. And I put the Tombow dual adhesive. So I put it on there, let it dry. So now it's sticky. So this will act like a cling stamp. So we'll try that out together in just a minute because I thought that was a cool idea of turning a die into a stamp. And then I also took any liquid that you have in the refrigerator comes in these sort of foil wax paper containers. And it's probably about, this probably would be a little trickier to cut with the thin die cuts, but with that thicker one, I was able to cut it just fine. I don't know if I could get through that material with this lacy one. So I didn't try that one, but I mean, I'm willing to try, but it's a little bit thicker. So it may not work with that, but it worked great with this thicker die. And this die comes not only with that, but it comes with an emboss folder as well. So you can either cut and then emboss, or emboss and then cut. I think it's easier to cut it and then emboss it because you can line it up on here once it's cut. I think easier, but you could, because this you can't really see through. If I was using like one of these ones, let's see. If I was using this, I could kind of line it up a little bit easier, but I can't really see anything with this. So I think it's a little bit easier to cut first and then do the embossing, but it comes out with a really cool look. And that's just by itself. I didn't add anything to it. there's the other side. That's a protein drink. So you can upcycle your any of your liquids from your recycling and your liquid containers from recycling. You can also, like I showed you before, you can upcycle aluminum cans. Aluminum cans are really, really thin. It's really, really thin aluminum. I can easily cut this material with my scissors even. I mean, it's really thin. Now, I used a utility knife. Here, I'll just show you basically how I did it. Do be careful. I didn't use gloves, but I did take my time and I was just really cautious. And I just used one of these small cans, but sometimes you can even use the pattern that's on there. But you just basically stab into it. It goes in pretty easy and then cut down. And you can decide at some point you want to cut with scissors, or you can cut it most of the way through with this and then cut with scissors to clean up the edge. But you can see, I mean, it really doesn't take a lot of labor, you know. And then I can just, and then if it's kind of got sharp edges, I can trim it down. Get rid of anything that's ragged. And then you do the same over here. And then I cut it open this way. And it is very sharp. And it's like a really bad paper cut. You know, like if you run your finger on there, you will get cut. So just be really cautious if you want to do it. But I don't feel like, you know, I haven't so far, and I'm not exactly, you know, I can be a bit klutzy. So far I haven't needed a Band-Aid. I'm gonna knock on wood. But and this is a small one, so you could of course get more things out of a larger one. And you can either do the embossing like I showed before, or you can do the die cut, or you can do a combo. Now, I did find that when I did the emboss after cutting it, it did break in some areas because the emboss was just too much. So I think it's just too thin, or else I think the embossing folder I used has a pretty thick pattern. So I just would thin that out. So you could either use this side. I mean, you can't tell what that is if you wanted some color, or you could use this side. And like I said, it has a little embossing pattern as well. So that's kind of fun. And you can also get that look without going through that hassle by just using that aluminum tape. So that's an easier way. And I could I could tape this on to, because it is tape, you can just put it right on to cardstock and then do the die cut after it, and then it'll be a little bit firmer. This is real thin, so I could just peel this off and stick it onto something because it already has the adhesive. But if I stuck it to the cardstock, then of course I'd have to glue it on, but it'd have the cardstock to glue, so it'd be easy to do. So that is, I think, a little bit easier. This is, oh, I did do it with this. I wasn't sure if I was able to, but yes, I was able to use this tartan material and with that thin die cut. So it does kind of press it in a little bit, like it smashes it down. I noticed that especially with the styrofoam, because this looks pretty thick, and then it presses it all down, so it actually makes it thinner to fit the die. So that does work, and that looks really nice. Now this is a little bit waxy, so gluing it onto something is a little trickier compared to some other things. I do think that if you used some acrylic medium, that would, or those little gummy, the little sticky dots, I think that would work with that. But that could be one challenge with that. And then for the dragonfly, I took one of those and I did some heat emboss. Now, this is waxy, so I did notice that it was really, when it heated up, it was kind of melting the wax a little bit. So I guess I wouldn't recommend too much heat on these, or just be really careful. But I did some heat emboss with some metallic gold, and then I also did some alcohol inks to create that look. That looks really cool. So hot glue would probably also work to glue this down. A lot of fun can be had with finding, you know, thin materials out of your recycling. I did try a plastic bottle and I didn't have great results with that. I wasn't able to get it to take the shape very well. It was just really thin plastic. So, and it was real rounded and had a lot of texture to begin with. So another fun die cut technique is using these nested frames. So a lot of them come like this, where there's one shape and then you get all these different sizes. And those are great because then you can also create frames. So if you take two sizes and you put them both together on the same paper, you can actually create a frame. So I created this frame around the edge. That's not matting. That's actually, the black is actually a frame. And I cut out the white underneath with the large die cut, and then I did a frame with the next size and the larger one together. So essentially I can put two of these, and you can tape it or whatever. But if I cut with both of these at the same time, there's going to be, oops, let me bring this up. There's going to be essentially a frame. And I can choose whatever size. I can choose a smaller one for a bigger frame, but they're great for making frames. And they're great for making windows in cards, like cutting out an opening. And I'll show you an example of that too. And this one, I really like this deckled edge. This is actually something that is still out there. I got it recently, but it just makes a deckled edge on things. And I just think that's such a cool look. This is actually a die set together. And I mean, how easy is that? You just cut out on a piece of black paper. I stuck some yellow paper behind there to make the window shine. This is also something that's available. And I love the little tree, but you could make it you could make it white tree. You can use some things for all year round, but it's just really easy to just glue that together and you have a fun Halloween card without a lot of work. It's like one step. There's a cat in this one too. I didn't use the cat because my face was a bit small, and I just blended some ink on the white cardstock underneath the black frame. So it was a very easy card to make. Another fun idea is, I showed you this before, this window die, and this is what it looks like. The only thing I wish this had is, I wish it came with a die to cut out the slot for the window to have an opening, but it doesn't. So I just measured, I basically used a pencil and drew that in, and then I just cut using my paper trimmer. I just cut an opening just slightly larger because I wanted to make a card that could glow. And I don't know if this is going to show up for you guys or not because of the lighting. But essentially what I did was I cut out, this is another alcohol blend that I did, and I did that on freezer paper. So it's real thin. So you can see the light come through. So I used that decal trim to cut that paper. And then I cut the opening underneath so the light can come through. So what you can do is take those little candles. I don't have one of those right now, but you could take one of those candles and set it underneath, and then you could have a little lighted card. So that would be a nice little holiday card idea. I think they make the dies for fireplaces too, so that'd be a fun fireplace one as well. So you could do that with vellum, or in this case, I did that with that freezer paper and alcohol inks. All right. Oh my gosh, we're at 8:41. Okay. I also use that decal trim just to cut this. This was that one that I demonstrated with the heat emboss that I did the debossing with the stamp. And then I just use that decal edge to make it kind of interesting. So, and then I did the deckled edge to make an opening in this card, and then I put the white paper underneath. All right, and then this die, I want to show you, I think I showed you this card. This was the one that I mixed that glitter with the emboss paste. And then I just took that one piece of cardstock that had the little snow glitter balls on there. And this one is basically kind of like it divides the paper. So I just cut it and then shifted the paper down a little bit so you can get the dark background underneath. So that's a fun die cut. Now you could also just get rid of this bottom piece and just have that, or you could cut off the whole card. So it has a lot of fun ways to be used. Oh, I did want to show you this. You'll notice that there's black in here, and that's actually magnet. And I think I mentioned that before. It's stick-on magnet, sheets of magnet. I stuck it on some thick chipboard that I had. I cut it down to size, and that holds my dies so they're not all clumped up in my little folder. And that works real well. One thing that can be tricky, like the butterfly, is very intricate. Another one that can be challenging are the sentiment dies like this. They're awesome. They make a great accent, but they can be a little bit, futzy because they're small details. And again, see how there's the little holes there? You could just push them out the holes. Now, again, using the wax paper can help, but most of the time, you can just push on a couple of the holes and get them to come out. The biggest challenge is when they have parts that are inside, like the little innards, like these little pieces in here. Those are the ones that are tricky because this is very, very delicate. So trying to wrestle some of those out if they're not cut real well can be tricky. So it's very helpful to maybe use the wax, or make sure that they're cut clear through. Sometimes I've had to use my little craft knife to cut some of the little sides, but you just have to be really, really careful. But they're really fun. And these are pretty thin and they're delicate. So I like to maybe cut, 3 or 4 and stack them. And then I get a nice, hefty, thick one. So, because cutting thicker cardstock on these little thin dies is probably going to be more difficult to cut through it all. So it's easier to just stack them. You just basically cut them out, and then using a little fine tip, like a needle tip glue bottle, you can just go along the back. Another thing you can do, however, is this is tacky tape, and it's basically a sheet of adhesive, and you just put the paper right on here, and then you do the die cut, and then it basically cuts the adhesive right with the paper. So there's various variations of this, but that's a way to handle gluing these very intricate dies together or onto your project. All right, let's try out this butterfly stamp, and then we'll call it. I think I'll just use this clear block since I have the sticky on there. All right, so let's just give it a go. We'll see how it turns out together. I mean, even if it's not a perfect image, it still can give the shape of the butterfly. And then you can do like I did on that other one where I put the butterfly die above it. So it doesn't have to be perfect. And the styrofoam kind of makes it a little cushy. So I think that should work pretty well. Yeah, see, it doesn't show the whole image, but I'm okay with that. I think that looks really cool. And I think if I just added one of these guys over the top, you know, like that was the background, I think that would be really cool. So I'm liking that. Now cleaning it's going to be a little bit tricky because I don't want to get it wet because it's on cardstock, so that's a problem, but I think I can mostly just dab it. I want to try it with, this is not pigment ink. It is the dye base, but it is very juicy, so I think it might work. So I just want to see how it looks compared to the pigment ink. It really does make a big difference. Yeah, I think that works pretty well. I think that even showed up better. So you can turn your dies into stamps by upcycling your styrofoam if you want. There you go. Okay, I think that's a happy note to end on. Many things and many fun are much fun that you can have. Oh, I didn't mention this, but of course, I think it goes without saying, you can do your sentiments. You can actually use this part of the sentiment. So you could put some cardstock underneath, or you could just have it open on your card. So that's a fun way to use that too. So I'm going to keep thinking of ideas if I don't just stop. So I'm going to just call it.